I wanted to be a physio. My cousin had became a quadriplegic when I was quite young, and I spent a lot of time in rehab hanging out with him, trying to make his days better. And I decided that it was life-breaking. I was going to be a physio. I was going to solve the world's problems and contribute everything to make people's lives well. And I did do that. And I worked in neurophysio, looking at patterns of normal movement and how people move, and then allowing replication of that for people to improve after they've had a stroke or a brain injury. And that was all great and well, but I wasn't very good at it. So I had to find a way of making physio work for me. And I went off and did primary school teaching, and then decided I didn't like children. So I was in a bit of a bungle. So what I do now is I train adults. So I use all my primary school teaching skills to get my little darlings, and I train adults. And I work for a hospital equipment company, which in some ways, sort of my morals and ethics, I'm working for a sales company, but I'm really lucky I work for a good company where I do this. I give information to people so that they can make more logical choices. But also in regards to some of you, it might not be applicable, but understanding the concepts of mobility and powered mobility is really important, that foundation of knowledge, so that when you go to make a choice, you're an educated consumer and you're not just dictated to. Obviously, we know how hard it is to navigate health systems, and you've got to be empowered, and knowledge is that knowledge is power. So today we are going to, if I can get this to work, to talk about powered mobility. The ability to access the world, to do what we want to do and not be limited by physical natures is really, really important. And that might be through the use of walkers, it might be through the use of a commode in a bathroom, but our ability to be able to get out there and have the world's adventures the same as everybody else is really important. And that may be down to the importance of a wheelchair. So some of the slides I go through will be talking about facts, and when I talk about facts, I'm talking about clinical evidence, and that's studies. So studies can be done on anything. They have to be validated studies, so I could go off and use my physio skills and do a really terrible study, so it's got to be a validated study, and when we get the information from those and we extrapolate it, and we can come up with definitive facts that the majority of people are going to show or follow if we had the same scenario. So in regards to powered mobility, it increases the opportunity for participation in life. It builds self-confidence and self-esteem. It promotes interest in other forms of mobility. So mobility breeds mobility. The more you can do, the more you want to do. Promotes and builds independence in activities of daily living. Enhances the development of cognitive and perceptual skills. So part of our natural developmental stages is our brain is aligning as we're growing and learning, and being in a powered mobility chair and being able to still access and complete tasks really helps in the way in which the brain lays itself down for development. Powered mobility can be introduced anywhere throughout the lifespan, and it can be just as effective and just as advantageous no matter when that is, and it can be motivating and bring pleasure. Powered mobility traditionally was a final step when we couldn't achieve what we needed with other mobility devices, but that's sort of been switched around on its head a little bit now. You'll find in paediatrics, many powered wheelchairs are going to be the first choice rather than being the last choice. That's because we know now that the benefits of power allow for such a much better experience in those vulnerable years. There are several prerequisites of seating. So when we take into account, this doesn't just apply to powered mobility, it applies to mobility in general. There are a couple of criteria that we need to take into account. So you can also think of these in some regards, just in regards to any sitting, seat sitting, car sitting, any seating. We're just going to run through what these are in regards to achieving an ultimate sitting position. Our bodies by nature aren't designed to be seated for a period of time. So for those of you lucky enough to sit on your butts all day, we have to take into account some really important things in order to make that safe, comfortable, and allow it to be achieved. So the first is positioning. It's quite an obvious one. What is the position that we're going to put the person in? Well, when we put ourselves in a sitting position, there's going to be two factors that are going to determine how we position in the chair. We need to decide whether any of the postural deformities are fixed or flexible. If we have a deformity, a scoliosis that's fixed, we're going to accommodate that. So we're going to make sure that we're not sitting on one bottom cheek, not the other, because you'll have a lot of weight going through one bottom cheek, and that will lead to ongoing problems. If it's a flexible deformity, we need to make sure we can correct that as much as possible to ensure that we don't go into the cycle of creating of fixed deformities. Before a powered wheelchair or wheelchair assessment is done, we have what's called a MAT evaluation. And it's where they evaluate, and they do an adapted MAT evaluation in order to determine what the range of movement, flexibility, muscle length is like, so that can all be taken into account when you're looking at the final chair selection. In regards to position, there is an ideal position that our bodies biomechanically are best to go into. However, in saying that, every individual is different. So if somebody has shorter hamstrings, we're going to adapt that into the chair and change that position. So when we go through positioning now, we're going to be looking at what would be ideal and what we're trying to achieve, but we obviously wouldn't have to force somebody into that position. We'd take and adapt the chair to allow for changes in that position. So the first is our pelvis. How do we want to orientate our pelvis? Well, we can have a forward rotating pelvis, or we could have a reverse rotating pelvis. We actually want it to be sitting in the middle. So we don't want somebody with a curve in their back. Oh, I've got a pointer. Wonder how I use it. There. We don't want somebody to have a curve in their back there, because remember our back is an S shape and we should have our lumbar curve there. We don't want somebody to be curved the other direction. We're looking at trying to get that pelvis really nicely aligned, and we'll look at why that is in a second. In saying that though, if we have adaptations happening up further in the spine, we may have to accommodate for that lower in the spine in order to create a balanced sit. So ideally, we'd love to have the pelvis sitting up nice and high, because what we're sitting on is our sitting bones. At the bottom of our pelvis, we have our ischial tuberosities. They're the two little C-shaped parts of the pelvis, and that's what we're best to be sitting on. If we're sitting in this posture here, we start sitting on the bottom of our sacrum and coccyx. It's a very delicate area. So the other option is that sitting on the skin in that part of the body isn't ideal either. And when we come through here, we end up starting to sit on our femurs too much. Oh, this one, femurs too much. So positioning of the pelvis is really important. Our knees and our feet give us the stability. It gives us the balance that we need to stop ourselves from going forwards or backwards. So making sure that we accommodate as best as possible our feet. Ideally, we'd have a 90-90-90 position. That's the ultimate goal that we're looking for. But the actual goal is to make sure that legs and feet are supported, because to be able to do gross upper limb movement, we need to have stability in the lower limb. So making sure that those feet and those legs are supported enough to allow us to shift body weight. Trunk and body. The fit of a chair is really important. Really, really important. Because you're sitting in it for a long period of time, you want to be comfortable and supported, but you don't want it to be too big, whereby you're having to reach and bend to be able to get for that support, and you don't want it to be too tight, in which it's then going to cause pressure injury, pain and discomfort. So making sure that the fit of the chair is right isn't just about one size fits all. There's components of each section of the chair that needs to take into account the components of each section of your body. So it's not necessarily talking about a straight up and down chair like we have here. We're talking about something that's going to be adapted in multiple areas. Shoulders and arms. It plays an amazingly important part in seating, especially when we're seated for a long period of time. Ideally, if we're using a powered chair, our arms will be at neutral, so a relaxed shoulder by our side and our elbows at 90 degrees, so that position there. To allow us to use a powered control, the shoulder will generally come forward by 15 degrees, and if we're a manual wheelchair user, we're going to have an angle of 30 to 60 degrees to be able to access that wheel. The arms for support is really important for the ability to stay in a chair for a long period of time as well. So getting that angle right is important. Head. Not everybody has a headrest on their chair. It does serve a really important benefit when we look at variation in a second. But when we're looking at head alignment, again, you're taking into account where the head sits naturally. So we want the head to be sitting naturally and be supported, especially if the chair's going to recline. but you don't want to be forcing the head into a position that it doesn't want to be as well. So if somebody has a slightly poked neck, we might not position the headrest right onto their head. We might take it back a couple of centimetres to allow for some movement backwards, so we don't want to be reinforcing that deformity. Ideally, we want to have it in midline, and we want to have the ability to rotate, which is be able to engage in the world. Stability. So if we put someone in the right position and we get all the fit and measurements of the chair right, what we have to then do is look at stability. How do we keep that person in the position that's ideal for them to be sitting in? The main thing that happens in a chair is slipping forward, especially if we don't have that great balance of our legs and we haven't got our feet in the ideal position to be able to stop that from happening. So trying to keep somebody's bottom right back in the chair, and for those of you who know what it's like to have a wheelchair, you know perfectly well when you're in the chair properly or not, whether your bottom's back far enough. Once we have the person in that position, it's really important that they stay in that position, because again, if we come forward, we're going to be sitting onto our sacrum again. Not the ideal way to be sitting. Really important, something I'm very passionate about is skin protection. Has anyone had a pressure injury before? No? I had a pressure injury after I gave birth to my child, after doing IVF and struggling to make this beautiful child, and arrived in a swarm, and then they left me on the birthing bed for 24 hours almost, and like a lunatic, coming up a physio, I don't know what came over me, I just lay there and got a pressure injury on my bottom. So a pressure injury is when we have a bone on the inside and a surface on the outside. And when we take a bone and a surface and push them together, we're going to squash everything that's in the middle. And what's in the middle of those? Skin, fat, and tissue. If you take your finger on your palm and you press down for a while and squash that tissue, you see a white dot appears, and that's because there's no blood there. I literally have squashed those little blood vessels down and prevented oxygen and nutrients from going into that area, and prevented carbon dioxide and waste product from coming out. And that's all well and good. Our bodies are designed to be pushed and pulled, but when you leave that on there for a period of time, eventually those skin cells will die. And that's called a pressure injury. Pressure injuries are created by many different reasons. One is pressure. We're all different amounts of tolerance as to how much pressure we can accommodate over how much period of time. So for some people, if you're in a poor nutrition state, if you're overweight, if you're a hot and sweaty person, you're going to be more likely to develop this. The time where it becomes problematic is when you lose your mobility. So if you're in a situation where you're not able to shift your weight in your chair or move around in your bed, you're going to start becoming really at risk of pressure injury. So mobility is the key to be able to prevent that skin under those ischial tuberosities from dying. So there we have pressure. So our bodies are designed to offload pressure all the time. So in bed, we roll over, we do little shifting movements all the time, and then we'll do a great big gross movement and roll over, offloading all of that skin. And our bodies do that naturally. Whilst you're sitting in your chairs, you lean forward, you're leaning over on your left buttock, you've gone over to your right because you've crossed your legs, and we're constantly doing this in our cerebellum without having to think about it. It's just innate. Albeit when your bottom cheek gets sore, you're going to think about it and you're going to move. People who lose that ability to reshift that weight, you've just lifted your bottom up to, yeah. So we do a lot of different adaptive movements, and you build some of those in. So obviously it's not an innate, natural thing to lift ourselves up, our bottom that direction, but you've adapted that into your life to allow you to get away from this problem, so that flush of blood comes back through and the risk of that tissue dying now decreases. The other thing that causes pressure injury is called shear, and this is getting easier to demonstrate as I get older. If I press on the back of so I've got pressure, which is downwards, and then shear is where I push the skin in a direction, and I'm not pushing my hand across, my hand's staying, but I'm getting puckering of my skin. So what's happening is under the layers of skin, I'm getting little tears down deeper through the skin, and that's called shear. Shear is when we're not positioned properly, when we start to shift And that skin will stay, the bone will start shifting down. So they're the two biggest causes of pressure injury and skin damage, is pressure and shear. As we continue on, we're going to be talking a lot about different ways in which to prevent pressure and shear. And as you get advised on chairs and on mobility, they'll build all this into account, but it's really important that you understand the risk of pressure. Once you have a pressure injury, it's never ever the same, because you end up with scar tissue, and scar tissue doesn't have collagen, and that leads to then more likely chance of that section breaking down. So pressure injury is a really important one. Okay, wheelchairs, variation. Variation lends itself to this idea of pressure injury. It also lends itself to the nature of the way in which our bodies function. So, for example, in sitting, our bladder doesn't clean out the way that it should. It likes to be able to come up. When we're standing, our diaphragm's able to come really down really deep, so our lungs fill up all the way to the bottom. When we sit down, our organs push up, and our diaphragm doesn't do as great a job. Varying the way in which we sit or in which we are positioned is really important to allow for those bodily functions to all interact as best as they can. Variation in a wheelchair refers to the changing of posture. When you have to stay in a chair for a long period of time, the ability to be able to change posture using a tilt or a recline is a really important factor. It minimises the likelihood of slipping down the chair, it maximises the amount of time able to be spent in the chair, and it adds to the comfort level. Recline is when we take a backrest and we tilt it back, so we're opening the angle at the hips. Tilt in space is when we keep the 90 degrees of the hips and we bring the chair back. If we just tilt a chair this way, we're going to slide out of it. Okay? So we'd always do a tilt in space first, and then if we need to, we'll open up the angle of the hips. Science tells us lots of lovely things about tilting. And for those of you who don't have tilt in your chairs, you're obviously not going to have a little nap in them, because it makes for a really, really comfortable ride, and it allows for you to be able to not only relax, release, and have the blood flow back to your bottom, but it also means that you can add some stability. So by changing the position at which the chair is, it can stop you from sliding down. So clinical research, what do we have to say about tilt and recline? This is a lovely area which is well investigated, and so we can have definitive angles which we know things work. So the first one is tilt when used alone, so tilt in space, which is the 90 degrees going back, must be greater than 25 degrees to achieve pressure relief and tissue perfusion, which is the reflowing of blood back in, at the ischial tuberosity. So the first lesson is that it must be greater than 25 degrees. The second is performing tilt with recline, so doing both of those functions together for a duration of 3 minutes is more effective than 1 minute. So we often used to say every hour have a minute reclined, gets your bottom all back in gear and you can come back up again, but we now know that a little bit of a longer duration than that is much more effective. And encouraging periodic movement improves posture, productivity, and decreases pain. So we know that the effect of being able to do short periods of tilt and relax back onto your back is advantageous. The mechanism of it is that by taking the weight off your bottom, so when you're sitting, you've got the entire bulk of your body load going through your buttocks. When you recline back, some of that weight will go through your back, so it's transferring the weight shift, really. So fully weight bearing on your buttocks to weight bearing on your back, less on your buttocks. Vibration. Vibration's a funny thing because there's hardly any evidence about vibration in wheelchairs, but there's a lot of evidence of vibration in mountain bikes and golf buggies. So I think if you're wealthy and you've got a mountain bike or a golf buggy, then that's where all the evidence comes from. So we're able to extrapolate information, less from cars because it's a different type of vehicle altogether, but mountain bike studies are really, really useful for wheelchairs. Vibration, especially for you guys, is incredibly important, and it's actually something that's become a bit of a phase of excitement in the wheelchair world. When you're a wheelchair loser like me, you find it quite fun when everyone gets interested in vibration all the time. So vibration is one of those buzz things in wheelchairs at the moment, and understanding the effect of vibration and dealing with it. And the reason being is that we now know that the impact of vibration on a wheelchair user is really adverse. Creates fatigue and discomfort, increases the risk of secondary injury, postural deformity, and undue body stress and force, has a negative effect on posture, leading to pain and musculoskeletal disorders. Increased sensitivity to vibration can come from other factors such as pain, tone, and fatigue. Loss of position during the course of the day makes from the vibration itself. As you can imagine, if you rattle something enough, it's going to change position. And increased risk of tissue breakdown. Minimising the exposure to vibration in a powered wheelchair is incredibly important, and it's a science that's really developing at the moment. I'm lucky enough to work with a brand of wheelchairs that's really spent a lot of money in suspension to deal with vibration. And lending itself to all of these is comfort and support. As we talked about before in regards to the fit of a wheelchair, if a wheelchair is even slightly too large, you're going to get the change in this posture here. When you get a change in posture, it's all great and well for one day, but when you adopt this posture for a period of time, your body will morph into that position, so we obviously don't want that. The second image here, because the armrests are too low, he's doing an adaptive posture in his upper body. And on the right, if somebody's tired and they're in a chair, they need to be able to rest. So if you're standing, you'll sit or you lie. If you're in a chair, you need to be able to use that variation within the chair to be able to rest, because gravity isn't your friend when you're sitting up at 90 degrees. The goal of it all, accessibility and function. Being able to attend to the hobbies and dreams and aspirations that we have whilst using a chair shouldn't be limited by the chair itself, because that's against the whole purpose of why we'd be using the chair in the first place. So having a chair that has the features that we need to allow us to access that world is incredibly important. And we know that in children, the ability for them to be able to access and participate in age-appropriate and meaningful activities has a major impact on their mental health as they continue in life. So being able to give them that opportunity as early as possible. Okay, more facts. So I'm back to my evidence, so I better read properly. So powered mobility in children, lots of information in regards to that for us. And as I said, power is a go-to now, because they know that the benefit on children of powered mobility is so high. Interestingly, learning to use a wheelchair triggers the same developmental parts of our brain as what does standard development milestones. So accessing a wheelchair, a powered wheelchair, stimulates the brain in the same way as learning to crawl. So they know that the importance of taking one type of mobility and using another form of mobility can be just as fantastic for developmental of the brain. It improves effectiveness and efficiency of movement, obviously, enhances independence and overall development, increases the amount of activity and the participation in those activities, reduces the risk of developing a passive dependent behaviour. And that's really, really important for kids. We also know by facts that the parents feel better seeing their children have a sense of control. And we know that it leads to an improved integration into hobbies, sports, education and employment. So if we take into account our goals for optimum seating, we then have to figure out how we put a chair together to allow for those parts to happen. So we're just going to look at some of the components that make up a powered wheelchair so that we can understand where those sections are where we get to make choice. So there's a lot of personal choice attached to it, and you want to be able to be empowered when you're at each stage of selecting a chair and what the advantages and disadvantages are. They're not all the same. It's like, what's it like, pram shopping or car shopping? Both the same. You want to add one thing, but you lose your aircon in the back. Yeah? You want a wider, softer seat belt? Well, your tow bar's just gone. You can't have it all. So you've got to find the right chair for you. And you're going to have such an intimate relationship with your chair, it has to be the right one. So I work with many brands of wheelchairs, but particularly I like this wheelchair, the TAIQ. So I'll probably just reference it a little bit as we go through. Position of the drive wheels. Been having a look around. We've got a nice mix of rear, front, and front wheel drive. And there's reasons behind why we choose each of these. One would be the turning circle. So when we have a central wheel drive, a mid-wheel drive, we're going to be able to turn on the spot. Whereas if we have a wheelchair, so looking forward with its front wheel drive, our turning circle is going to be quite large. And for the rear wheel drive, it's a medium size. Now, why is that important? It's important for access. Some people may be limited by space in their environment, so are forced into a mid-wheel drive. Some people, because of the balance of body weight, may need more support in the back, so will opt for a rear-wheel drive. And some people's homes will be designed in a way in which they're going to have to be able to navigate through a hallway and into a room, they're going to have one option or another. So if we're having a mid-wheel drive, we turn on the spot and go into a room. Front-wheel drive have to do a large turning circle to be able to get into the room, and a rear-wheel drive past the room and then turn to come back into it. Accessories for a wheelchair, unlimited. Most of the accessories that we have are designed to help with posturing and positioning and prevention of ongoing deformity. So that can be all the way, obviously you're straight away, you'd have your cushion and your backrest, but different foot supports, pelvic supports, leg supports, in order to make that as comfortable as possible. The cushion and the backrest are integral to the positioning in a chair, and there are many brands and many different specifications. They're very customisable to make sure that we mimic your natural body as much as possible to make that as comfortable and not to add to any of the pressure injury risk. In regards to cushions, two options. One is to accommodate a change in posture. So a fixed posture that we don't want somebody weight bearing too much on one side. We want them to be able to be weight bearing on both sides, but we might need to raise one side up to support the body part. Or a deformity that we're able to correct by putting somebody onto the right cushion to be able to bring them back into neutral. Foot plates. Foot plates are really important because you need to be able to reach them. That's one really important fact. There is different types of foot plates we can get. These ones here extend up so that your legs can go out straight in front of you and be supported. This one here is an electric foot plate that comes down to the ground so you can step on and off it. Drive control, that's really, really important that you test and try a lot of different controls because you're going to have preference of one over the other. Some are going to be easier to use, some are more intuitive, some are more basic and much easier. So that's important. The distance that a chair can go. You don't want to be buying a chair that only goes to 30 kilometres if your shop's 20 kilometres away. You need to be able to get there and back. We'll all have the same problem with electric vehicles. We're going to need to plan ourselves a little bit better. There are many factors that affect the distance that you're able to go in a chair. It's obviously the battery. But there's many contributing factors, such as the ground that we go over. If we're going over bumpy ground, if we're going up and down hills, we're going to get less kilometres out of that chair itself. But you need a chair that goes a long distance to allow you to have as much distance as you can with charge. Maximum speed. Walking speed, brisk walking speed is about 7 kilometres an hour. So chairs go up to about 12.5 kilometres an hour. So it's a running speed. But if you're going to be in a chair, you get to run. So you can choose whatever speed you want. Crash testing. really important when you're choosing a chair that when they say it's crash tested, that it's actually been crash tested with a crash dummy in it. A lot of chairs are crash tested just a chair. That's very good, the chair survives, but you want to know what happens to you when you're in it. Being able to access a vehicle whilst in a chair is important, especially in a powered chair, because they are heavy and difficult to navigate, so you want to be able to travel in the chair. So tie-down points are essential. Harnessing is essential in order to prevent injury when an accident occurs, but make sure that you check out whether they were crash tested with a dummy. Functions. This is the best part of wheelchairs, is what they can do, because they're magic. There's lots of different things that you can do. And powered functions are even better. So we have powered tilt, so that's where we took that 90 degrees and tilted it in space. We can have a recline, and that's a really flat wheelchair. Most of them don't go that flat. Recline and a tilt in space at the same time. Powered stand-up or powered seat elevation. Powered seat elevation is special to me. I find it's just such a wonderful ability to be able to change height and posture. It provides so much independence, and it provides so much equality for people to be able to access the varying heights of the world. So that's all fine and well to raise a seat up, but we need to be able to access it. So finding out what the maximum and lowest height of a wheelchair, they'll come with all different dimensions. So they'll have minimum and maximum seat widths or seat depths, seat height, and there's a lot of variation. So you can have different brands which all have different specifications, but within one brand there's a whole lot of play that you have in regards to height. So the wheelchair that I work for is 38 centimetres from the ground, so that low to the ground, and then you get 30 centimetres of lift. So that's why I love this chair, because it's so easily accessible. So you're able to step on and access the low height of that chair, and then get your 30 centimetres of raise. Okay, suspension. This is the exciting bit for me, because it's what protects against vibration. So what is suspension? Suspension is the inbuilt mechanism of a wheelchair that allows us to separate ourselves from the environmental vibration that's occurring below us. So I made this graph all by myself. I couldn't find what I wanted. I wanted to show, and there was one piece of evidence, but it was all grainy, so I thought, I'll just do it myself. So if we're going over an environment that's rocky and hilly, so we've got our wheels moving up and down, the nature of the wheels itself is going to absorb some of that vibration. So the material in which the wheels are made of and their size. So they're two important factors. So your wheels are going to be going on this journey up and down, but what we're trying to do is isolate what's happening here and keep what's happening there as steady as possible. So you're going to have the wheels making some adaptations. You're going to have the suspension, so you're going to get a little bit less vibration up through here. Then you're going to have some absorbed through the chassis, and then you're going to have some absorbed in the interaction of the seat. So the goal is that top line, which is the bit that's affecting you, is minimised as best as possible. Addressing vibration. There are 4 reasons that addressing vibration is important. The first is comfort. It's not nice being exposed to vibration. It's actually one, in work health and safety terms, it's one of the highest problems that they have in workers, is the sense of vibration and the effect that that has on the body. It leads to very fast fatigue. Muscles don't work well under vibration, so you get a deterioration in the ability for those muscles to work, and it means you're going to get slippage in posture, and you're going to have less time being able to be spent in the chair. Stability. When you shake something, it's going to shift and move. So we're going to lose that beautiful posture that we were trying to create when we started at the beginning of today. Traction. When we get vibration and we don't deal with it at the wheelbase, you're not going to be able to get the traction that you need to access the difficulties of off-road travel. So to be able to use those variety of surfaces, we need to be able to minimise the vibration so that our wheels can keep spinning and we don't get snagged. And we want to reduce the force through our bodies. As I said before, the excessive stress of vibration plays a really big part in injury and in decreased ability to stay into a chair. And we obviously don't want any extra contributing factors to musculoskeletal disorders or deformities. Measuring up for a chair is really complex. So it's done with an OT, sometimes a physio, usually an OT, and an equipment provider. So you can see the number of measurements that need to be taken. And this is because this chair is going to be so independently set up for you, intimately set up for you. So the difference between the width of your shoulders versus the width of your waist is going to be really important. The difference between the height from your coccyx to the base of your scapula versus to the top of your head is going to be important because we're all different dimensions in all of those parts. So I just wanted to say thank you from Novis. We work in lots of different areas, obviously wheelchairs and specialised wheelchairs. Wheelchairs of this nature fall into what's called a complex rehabilitation space. So it's not off-the-rack style product, healthcare product. If you went to a commode and you were looking for a commode to transfer into in a bathroom that is not environmentally set up, then that's an off-the-rack product. But complex rehabilitation is a specialty that physios and OTs go into, and all they do all day is setting up wheelchairs for people's specialised needs. And that's because it has to be such a specialised area, because the impact of getting it wrong is really, really high. The impact of it going wrong can lead to pressure injuries, poor mobility, loss of the ability to access life. So the point of the wheelchair is to grow and gain all of this benefit. And if you don't get something very simple right, you can end up destroying that altogether. So it's very, very easily gone wrong. So the power that you needed today was in the knowledge that you gain, in the friendships that you gain, the power of a wheelchair, the power of being able to go and access the world and to do that independently with happiness. Thank you. And I'll just play you this video because I love this little video. Anyone have any questions? Yes?
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree with more. I think, for me, mobility is anywhere I want.
Yep.
I want without getting back at it.
Faster than me, yeah.
Yeah. And so, essentially, a power share doesn't,
Yep.
in a way that kind of makes me feel like I've got a good power. You know, it really is such a big shift in the humanity.
Yes.
My question is, I guess, you've obviously educated children, but is there research that's been done around the benefits of this for adults?
Absolutely, yeah.
And can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, look, the benefit of, if you look at any evidence in regards to gaining of independence and gaining of control over your own destiny, that wouldn't even have to be just a wheelchair piece of evidence. Humans innately have a sense of adventure, so there's a couple of things as humans that we need to satisfy. One of them is togetherness. We like to cuddle. So cuddling and being close to people is one of the innate things that we like to do, but sense of adventure and control over ourselves is another innate need. So if we're going through life without satisfying that innate need, you're going to have long-term problems, just as people who don't connect with other people are going to. So in an adult population, a wheelchair is able to access employment, able to access hobbies, able to socialise. Without those things, the consequences psychologically are going to be really, really high. In regards to physically, obviously maximising what can be done with hands and what can be done in gross and fine motor skills is going to make a massive difference to somebody in order not only to maintain the ability to do those things, but to minimise the amount of structural deformity that we create whilst trying to do them. So I'm sure there's a million pieces of evidence on the benefits of mobility for adults, but it really would come back to that sense of control and independence, which we all deserve.
If I could just add, I think psychologically, often as an adult, needs going to be difficult.
Yeah.
wheelchair. And I think it's, for me, that's the comment, when you said that paediatrics, you're kind of starting at the
Yeah.
power wheelchair, and that means you're open to other mobility.
Yeah, and look,
So I think that's probably true for adults.
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
we're trusting in health professionals that that initial contact that we have with a piece of equipment isn't seen as a failure. You know, there are some people that need to use patient lifters and have to be moved with lifters, etc. And often when that's introduced to them, it's a negative thing, and that will stay with people for the life. There's a lot of evidence in regards to communication and how our mouths can get us into a lot of trouble, and that's because when I'm presenting a wheelchair to someone, if it's not innately what I want for my life, then it will come with a negative bias attached to it from the beginning. So obviously when parents have small children and we're introducing the concept of wheelchair, it shouldn't ever be presented in that way that, you know, if you deteriorate enough, you'll be able to use a wheelchair. So it's about the opportunity for a wheelchair, and it's about introduction of that earlier in life. So in times where, times of immobility, etc., being able to utilise in small batches and create achievement really sets you up to be able to see it as a wonderful opportunity in life.
Keeping people up with development, stages and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of, even just eye contact, being up high enough to have eye contact. Eye contact, and that is one of those ornate things that we have as humans. We engage, all of you. As soon as I look at you, I'm looking at your eyes and you're looking at my eyes, or my big nose, or hopefully my eyes. It's one of those connections, so it's a non-verbal connection that we do with our eyes. So just even being up high enough to be able to do that easily, really, really wonderful opportunity. Thank you so much for having me. I feel very passionately about mobility. I really am a giant dork, but when you see what we get to see every day and what a difference mobility makes to people, what a difference it makes to see people be able to do things by themselves for the first time in years, it means that that physio in me is still being really satisfied by helping people. So I won't have to touch you, but I'll still be able to help you, which is beneficial for everyone. So thank you so much for having me today. And you've got so many good speakers coming up, so many good speakers. And tomorrow sounds absolutely amazing. Genetics is one of my favourite, most interesting things to listen to. And I'm sure that will be a good one as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Elissa. Oh, I'm not on. Oh, I was on.
You were.
So thank you so much, Elise. That was really very interesting.
My pleasure.
Was there any other questions? We have a couple of minutes just before. If there was any other things that anybody want to know? Yep. Yep.
The multi-line graph that you showed before, what was the numbers on the wire?
Oh, I made the numbers up. The numbers were irrelevant. The idea is that you go from a large amplitude to mid-chair, a smaller amplitude, and obviously much smaller when you get to your body. That's the goal anyway.
It's a smoother ride. Okay, oh, thank you so much. Have a little gift.
Thank you so much for having us, and good luck tonight. Have a wonderful time. I'll just hang around, and I've got cards for anything you'd like, because you need to be able to touch and feel and play. So making sure that you can get your hands on a wheelchair. Dirty person over there. Making sure that you can get your hands on cushions and try and test and see what you have. Make sure you just sing out, because that's what we do all day, is just letting people play with equipment so they can get their head around what's going to be best for them.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you.